Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue on in this entity framework app build. This is the second video in the series. And if you remember, we had left off at this point. We're still on part one, which is basically the get started page. And they're talking about the data model. And as I mentioned in the previous video, this data model is a little bit more complicated than some of the previous stuff that we've done, which is basically one straight, flat file or a table from a database. And while that might work for some, websites or applications, often databases are not that simplistic. They're much more complicated. And what you're seeing here is one that tries to set up this scenario. And you can see at the bottom of that graphic there, it says a student can enroll in any number of courses, and a course can have any number of students enrolled in it. So that there's a little bit of a, logical underpinning to this. So in other words, wherever we have the student has a one-to-many relationship with the enrollment table. And it makes sense, right? Like a student can enroll in more than one course at a time. And then not only that enrollment information then ties specifically to a course. So the student isn't directly enrolling in a course, they're setting up their enrollment here, and then that enrollment can then tie to one record. So in other words, I can get a number of students to sign up for the same class. So the relationship from the course table to the enrollment table, once again, is one to many. And this is a more complicated data structure, right? So it has a lot of different ramifications to it. When you start to look at the student table itself, and they're giving you kind of like that Microsoft Access or SQL Server kind of view of the entity relationship diagram here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by building a models folder and then create a C# file that creates the data model for the student. So that's step one. So let's get Visual Studio back up and running here. I actually had shut it down, and the one that we were working on was the Contoso University. And so let's get that opened up. And as soon as it loads up, I'm going to go ahead and create that folder. So up here on the project root, I'm going to right click and I'm going to do an add, and I'm going to create a new folder. And this will be called models. And then just to make sure, I don't name it something other, they do want a C# file named student with a capital S. So let's go back to Visual Studio and let's right click. Let's add. We're simply going to add a class file here. That's just going to be a regular C# file named student.cs. And then go ahead and add on that. Now they have given us the code for it. So I'm going to highlight all this, and I'm just going to replace it with the provided code. And then we'll paste that in. Now we do have a little bit of an underline here. That's because we have not created this piece yet, so that's the why, right? So it's looking for an enrollment model or data structure that's not present, but it's going to be, right? So we're working on it. Let's go ahead and save this. That will eventually go away as kind of they start talking about the data fields here, and rather than kind of regurgitate it to you, basically they're going to have an ID field, first and last, or last name, first, middle name, if that's appropriate, a date time for the enrollment date. All those have getters and setters. And then, of course, that will then connect to the enrollment table or data entity, whatever you want to call it, with getters and setters, so that a student can both enroll and unenroll in classes and do more than one of them, right? So this is a more complicated data structure. And those of you that know C# know that, like, this nomenclature here with the brackets around enrollment indicates that it's a collection or a list of more complicated objects, right? So that's what that is. All right, so then we're going to talk about the enrollment entity here. So then we're going to create this file just called enrollment.cs with the following code. So just follow the same procedure. We'll right click, add a class. We'll call it enrollment.cs. Add that. Once again, we're going to highlight all the code and then replace it with the provided code. I think I copied it. Looking at the screen at the moment. There you go. And once again, you're going to see another red underline here because now it's pointing to course, and that doesn't exist yet. Student does, but right now there's nothing in there, so it's just kind of underlining. Notice the structure of this one, right? So there's going to be a grade that goes with the enrolled course. And then we have an enrollment ID, a course ID, and a student ID. And these are really kind of the fields that connect the tables together mostly. You guys will notice one data annotation that's already in here. So if there's basically a null value, it's going to say no grade. Grade seems to be an optional, right? Because I guess somebody could maybe drop it, but I would think you'd put a W in or something. The course and the student, as we discussed before. All right, let's go ahead and save that one. And they talk here about all of that and why they're using it. They're also talking about what's the primary key or foreign key. And if for those of you that aren't like super database trained, basically the primary key is the unique identifier within each table that makes any entry in the table unique. A foreign key means that it's enforced from an outside table. And so in other words, if I'm a student enrolling in a course with a certain ID, I can only enroll in that course with a valid ID from the student table, right? And so that would become a foreign key in the other table. So what's kind of interesting here is, without getting deep into the database stuff, they're just telling us that, the EF core interprets a property as a foreign key if it's named that. So once again, just the way that they're linking the tables together, and that's why they call it kind of a navigation property, because it allows you to connect from one spot to another. Now we're going to do a course entity. So once again, we'll create another class file called course. So let's right click, add new class. That's going to be called course.cs. Once again, highlight the code, replace it with the provided code, and you'll see in just a moment here what that contains. Once again, there is a data annotation here. And notice database generated option none. So in other words, they don't want, the way I'm reading it is they don't want the ID field auto generating. They want that to be manually entered. And that's not unusual for a school. So we don't want like a course to just be like some random ID number. We want a course to be a very specific course number so we know what it is. And that's what I assume that means. So we have course ID, the title, and the number of credits attached to the course. And then, of course, there's this enrollment here. And, if you kind of hover over this and look at what it says, basically, once again, we don't have anything data-wise to connect to, but in principle, that course could be used to be enrolled in multiple times is really kind of the mindset here. Right, Control S to save. And then let's go back to the instructions. Now, of course, they're explaining again about how all of this is put together. And then, the database generator, which is what I would have guessed. They don't want it to auto create an ID. The other thing is that right here it says, to eliminate warnings from nullable reference types, remove the following line from the Contoso University CS project file. And we're just adding this basically as a feature. So I'm going to copy this in. We're not going to, okay, so I want to correct that. We're not copying it in. I see the copy button. I just want to intuitively copy, but we are going to remove that line from that file. So let's go find it. So there is somewhere in here. Right, notice how I clicked on the root. So I'm not seeing the CS project file here. It's just attached properties to the root of the project. We see this line here. They asked us to remove it, so I'm just deleting it. So here it also says remove the question mark nullable reference type annotation from public string request ID get set in pages error CS HTML CS. Okay, so you got that. So let's go to pages error. Let's do that first. So pages error, and then find the public string request ID. And actually, okay, so I'm going to correct this. We're looking at the CS file attached to that error page, which is this one. And then it is this little annotation that we're going to remove. And you see how it's underlining, right? Request ID string. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm getting the right one. So we're removing that question mark, and then we are going to save. So those are a lot of pretty significant steps there, but now we're reaching the scaffolding steps. So we're going to go ahead and proceed, and we're going to proceed cautiously here. And we're going to read what we're doing a little bit before we press forward. Now, we've already had a little bit of experience, those of you that have been in the class with me on doing scaffolding. And this whole concept, once again, is where we create code files that represent the tables in the database. And then we don't even have the database yet. And then we're using the code to basically generate the database based on the code. And we call that approach, by the way, is called the code first approach. Now, let's read what it says here before we kind of use the scaffolding tool. It says an EF Core DB context class. The context is the main class that coordinates the entity framework for a given data model. It derives from this. Now we are going to have Razor pages that can handle create, read, update, and delete all the CRUD operations like we've done before. And so let's go ahead and do these steps to make it happen. So the first is to create under the pages folder a students folder. So let's do that step. So under pages, we're going to add a folder called students. All right. Then we're going to right click that folder and add new scaffolded item. So we're going to right click, add new scaffolded item. And then it says in the left tab, we want to get Razor pages. So installed common Razor pages. So we're going to go to installed common Razor pages. And then select Razor pages using Entity Framework CRUD, and then choose Add. Entity Framework CRUD, and then Add. So just following the steps. Now in the next dialog, we're going to let some of this kind of happen automatically. We're going to hit the models drop down and select student with this little extension on it. And then in the data context, select the plus sign. We'll do that. And then change the data context name to end in school context rather than Contoso University context. So we're looking for it to say this. So I'm just going to copy that. Let's go back. See, I like totally screwed that up. So Control Z is my friend here. I ended up clicking and dragging it. And so then let's just double check and make sure this is Contoso University data school context. Okay, looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click add. Select add to finish adding the data context, and then select add to finish adding Razor pages dialog. So I assume that we're not going to change anything here. And now it is building out all the CRUD pages. Now we've done this before, and we know that inside this folder, when it's all done, it will create a create, update, um, a read, and a destroy or delete. Let's give it a second to do all the work. Now, what's interesting about this, and you notice how it's taken a whole lot longer than the previous things that we've done, and that's because it's working with much, much more complex information, right? So it's tying into 3 data tables and negotiating all the little connections that we made via the code. Albeit there's not a lot, but you see that it did take a little while. So now we have the create, delete, details, edit, and index page under students. The other thing that it tells us is it also added tools for working with SQL Server and Entity Framework and automatic web design coordination stuff, or code generation stuff. So in other words, there's the HTML forms and entities and links that we need to interact with all the stuff is all kind of pre-created, right? So we don't have to sit there and manually code any of it. It does say here, so if this does happen to you, it says if the preceding step fails, build the project and retry the scaffold step. You see, I didn't have to do that, and I'm hoping that's your situation too. It tells us what it created. So it created all those pages that we looked at. Each one of those has a C# file attached to it. It also creates under the data folder, the school context.cs. Let's just go take a really quick look at that. So there's that file. And then it adds the context to the dependency injection in program CS. So if we look at that file, see the piece there. And then also adds a database connection string to the app settings JSON. So let's look at that really quick too, just to show you, right? So here's the connection to the database. So we just took a look at this, but they're showing it to us again. And please notice that, by default, it goes to a local database. Once again, if you are using an installed version of SQL Server on your machine and it's running active, it will identify it and attach to that instead. It's not really what I recommend, but you can work that way. And they start talking about SQL Server Express. We've talked about that before. All right, I'm going to pause here for a moment. All right, for the next little part here, we're going to basically update the database context class that we created. So that file that we had just pulled up, and let me just make sure that it's still here. So this one here, the school context under data, we are going to add some code to that. And so right below this little entry, and this is kind of interesting here, the way the curly brackets are. So basically, this set of curly brackets is empty. So I want to just double check that. Is it empty here? It sure is. Okay, so then we are going to add this code that's highlighted here to the remainder of the document. So let's jump back over, and then we're going to remove this, paste in that code. All right, it's good. No underlines. That's a wonderful thing. Control S to save, and then move on. All right, so it starts talking about what it did here, but basically what it's doing is it changed a couple of things. One of the more important things, and I'm glad they're pointing this out, is kind of changing the singular student here to students. And it basically it just makes it easier when you're referring to things, because when you're thinking in the plural, you're talking in the plural. And that's kind of a naming convention that I learned a while back from using like Ruby on Rails, right? We would use the same singular plural nomenclature so we wouldn't get lost in what we were building. Um, all right, so does talk about how all this goes. Um, and this is right, and they're correctly identifying. So many developers prefer that should be named plural because it just makes sense in our head, right? Not that you couldn't work with it the other way, but that's basically the why. Um, Now they are talking about like a little issue here, right? But they're talking about how they're going to fix it in the future release, and we don't know if actually they did. All right. So now they talk about the program CS file, and they talk about the fact that the .NET Core is built with dependency injection, um, and this context that we basically registered with the application is um, basically allowing us to connect to the database in a way that works for the app and also once again makes sense in the way that we're speaking about it. So they're saying here that the scaffolding tool automatically registered the context class with that container. And so if you look at that program.cs file, so let's do that quickly. There it is. And then you start looking at these two little pieces that were added here. And I'm not seeing them. So like, I just want to make sure I'm okay here. So I got the entity framework core. There's that one. And then, oh, okay. So they're just out of order in my eyes, not seeing it. So like the example shows that above. It doesn't matter where they're placed. It just shows that you're using that external piece. It also added this little piece, which pulls on that context, the school context. And that would be right down here, right? It does have also an exception handler built in if you're not noticing, just in case it's not connecting up. So we don't want the application to crash in that scenario. All right, next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the database exception filter, and then use my migrations endpoint as shown in the following code. So let's go ahead now in that file and right under that context line, we're going to add this line. So let's do that. So that's builder services, add database developer. And that's going to go here. And then we're going to add these lines to the if statement, hopefully. And I'm being really careful here. I just want to make sure the lines that I'm replacing. So it looks like I'm just going to take this curly bracket and paste. Now I am getting some underlines here, so that does concern me a little bit. All right. Okay. So this is explaining why. Now, so we added the code and it's looking for basically this tool, right? The Diagnostics Entity Framework Core, and it's not present. So now we're going to go to the command prompt and install this package. So we're going to do that from the package manager console. You may as well just copy the command from here. So let's go up here. First, let's save program CS, so Control S. Then I'm going to go to Tools. You get Package Manager Console. And just expand that panel ever so slightly so it's easier to see. And then I'm going to paste in the command. So the command is install package. We list which one we're installing. And could you use the graphical tool? I suppose you could. And then we got some sort of a message here. I don't know if it succeeded or not. Okay, so here's kind of the issue it's telling me is And I'm sure you guys are going to run into this too. All right, so basically what it's telling me is we're using .NET 6 to build this app, but this thinks it's using .NET 8. So we need to check on that really quick. Let me pause really quick for a moment. Okay, I have a thought here. I was looking at the properties of the application, and that's really kind of going down a rabbit hole I really don't want to go down. Um, actually cause more problems than you're solving. And what I'm thinking here is, why don't I just look up this package with the graphical tool and then I can select the right version? I don't know why that like occurs to me after the fact, but okay, so let's manage. And then let's see if that one is part of it. Okay, so it's not installed. We're going to browse for it. There it is. And then let's see if we can switch versions. And there we go. Okay. And I'm not sure which version is appropriate here. Let me just see if I can review this error message here for a moment before I select one, right? Because it might be in the error message, right? Okay, so, all right, so let's switch it to any version 6. And I'm just going to kind of randomly pick one here. I don't want to pick up like one of the, probably one of the later ones is probably better. I don't know if that's, and so you see what I'm doing here. So I do need to check the box. All right, let's go to the latest version. It says not installed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click install. We're going to apply. But it sure didn't like that. Okay, so I'm not sure if all the error messages now are an issue or not. Here it wants me to update to the latest stable. I don't want to do that for obvious reasons. I'm not really sure if I picked the right one. We'll find out. I mean, we're going to do what we can do here. And if that doesn't work, then we'll reconfigure from there. All right, it did create a bunch of errors, and I'm not really liking that. So let's go ahead and just take a look here. Okay, so you see how it registers into the project this way. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then I know there's a whole bunch of like errors popping up here. I'm not necessarily sure where they are, but it looks like it's on all those CS files. Don't like it. Let's just go take a look at one of these. So it doesn't like the student. And I think this might be that plural. All right, so there are some ways we could potentially fix this. I don't know if any of these. Yeah, and I think this is the fix, folks. We're going to find out in a second. I'm not going to make any rash things because maybe the tutorial explains it, and I haven't like pre-built the tutorial. So, we are flying, by the seat of our pants here. So, all right. So it doesn't say anything about those errors. I am tempted to try to fix them. And I think this is generally the fix. All right. So I'm going to just be brave and do it. And then I'm guessing that's the same. And you see how all the different ways I'm kind of accessing that, and it is fixing it, right? The underlines are going away. So really, I can just go in there and just type it in too. That's, since and then as I correct all those, then I'm getting rid of all those underlines. And you know what? I don't know if they explain that. Maybe I missed that in the tutorial. And you know what? You would probably do the same thing. But you notice like the one thing I'm not doing is like freaking out, right? I'm just trying to be calm about it and just roll with it. This is pretty minor. And, the more I think about it, yeah, this is exactly what we need to do. And these are the weird kind of errors you get in .NET applications, right? So you might not be creating the code manually, but you deal with the issues of the code. And I think we're okay now. I think all the errors went away. So not too bad considering. Let's do a control S to save. And actually what we should do is just do a save all. It saves everything in the application that we changed. All right. Next, we're going to do a couple of updates here so that we can create the database. So we're going to add this little phrase here. I want you to notice where it's being added. It's right below that if else statement. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to basically look at the database and notice the terminology ensure created, right? It's going to check to see that it is created. And if it's not, it will create it, right? So we are going to drop in that code that goes below the if statement in program.cs. It's here. Paste that in. So far, so good. See if there's any more changes here. No more changes in that file. So let's do a control S. Right, and it explains how it works, right? Right. Ensure created enables that the following workflow for handling data model changes. Delete the database, right? Change the data model, right? Run the app, and ensures that okay, that it's following the new schema. All right. Now they're making this point, and I think this is a good point. It says this workflow works early in the development when the schema is rapidly evolving. So we might not know all the database fields, and we just need certain ones just to get moving. And as long as we don't need to preserve that data because we're just developing, right? So we're going into a local database temporarily to get it all to happen. If it's already in a database, we're connecting to something that exists, or we're creating a brand new one. That's a whole lot different, right? Right. So we are going to allow this to basically build the database dynamically, and later, we might actually pump data into it, right? Well, actually, I see that that's coming next. There it is. All right. So now we're going to test it. We're going to run the app. We're going to select the students link and then create new. And then we're going to try edit details and delete, right? All of those should work. All right. So let's do that. Let's go back over to Visual Studio. We're going to do Control F5 here. We're going to run this without debugging. And not that we don't care about error messages, but it does sometimes impede things a little bit. So there's our thing. Notice, all the navigation. They wanted us to go to students. They wanted us to create new. And so and we'll give it an enrollment date. Notice that this time we also have a time. So let's just give it today at 10:37 p.m. and we'll hit create. And there it is. We can look at the details. We can edit those details. Save those details. And then, of course, we can delete it. Okay, so that does work. I don't know if it's having us test any of the other stuff right now. I guess I should probably read that, right? Yeah, it just said do students, right? And then we tested all of those things and they all worked. Okay, so we're okay. I am going to close the tab for right now. And I'm not sure I need to close the web server. We'll leave that running. All right, let's go back to the tutorial then. And let's do the seeding of the database, right? So the ensure created method created an empty database. This section adds code that populates the database with test data. Now, we've done this before. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to create a file called dbinitializer.cs. I'm just going to copy that name because I might misspell that one. And that's going to go in the data folder. So let's create it, and now we'll drop in that code. So back over to Visual Studio, right-click data, add a class file. We're going to name it dbinitializer and add. Let's highlight all this and replace with the provided code, right? And we'll look at it inside Visual Studio. So let's paste. All right, so this is a little bit more complex, obviously. Let's do Control S to save. So inside the namespace, we have a public static void initialize, right? So now notice if it looks first, and if there's a database and it has data, it's just going to pop out. It's not going to do anything, right? But if it's not there, then it's going to proceed and create instances of students. So it's going to create new student objects, feed in data. You can see all the fields and everything are all populated there. And then go ahead and create courses, enrollments. So it's going to pre-enroll the students and everything. Now, I am a little curious here. And one of the things that I'm curious about is if I looked at my SQL Server Object Explorer and checked my local database, it's this one, and there's the Contoso University, and then I look at the tables, do I have any data in here? And I don't. Okay, so like when I deleted that one, it's gone, right? And I don't know if I need to drop the database or not, like delete the whole thing. We're going to find out here in a second, when we run it. So I'm just going to close that, close this also. Let's see what the next thing is. Okay, so the code checks if there's any students in the database. If there's no students, it adds test data, and then it creates the test data in arrays. Okay, so what basically I anticipated. So in the program CS file, it says remove the comment from DB initialize line. So this one. So let's go do that. So that's in the program.cs. So right here, and notice they gave us this code already. So we're going to just delete that. Saving it. It says stop the app that's running and run the following command in the package manager console. So we're going to make sure that database is dropped. So I was correct in that assumption, I guess, right? So, and of course you could do it manually through SQL Server if you wanted, like the little sidebar. But let's do it like this. It's more fun, right? So we are going to go to the package manager console. It's not running. So let's go here. We are going to issue the command, drop database, and confirm. Okay, so now it's telling us what it's doing. Are you sure that you want to drop the database from this whole setup? And of course, we're going to type a capital Y for yes. And then it shows you, of course, what the command is, and it does it, and it says it was successful. So great, that's what we want to see. All right. Restart the app and select students page to see the seeded data. So let's do that. Let's go back, Control F5. Students, and then you see that whole list. So we have a whole bunch of people in here. They all have registration dates, times, etc. So it looks like it worked, right? It seeded it correctly. Now, could we look at courses? Notice how these aren't working yet, right? So the only one that's set up to work correctly, seemingly, is students at the moment. All right, let's go back to the instructions. And now what they want us to do is look at the stuff, right? And then look at the student data. And then, this is stuff that we've done before, folks. So, but let's do it anyhow, right? So it's good practice. So here is the student table. We can right click and view the data, right? We can also right click and view the code, right? We can also right click and view the designer, which tells us what the SQL code is that's used to create it. Right? If you're curious and want to type it manually, there you go. But all of it's there, right? And so everything looks good at this point. And we got just a little bit more left to do here. So let's read through this little piece here, and then we'll continue. All right, so this next little section is kind of an interesting one. If you read through this really carefully, it says asynchronous is the default mode for ASP.NET and ND Framework Core, but it also has this interesting thought here. Web server has a limited number of threads, or kind of individual program streams that are available. And it says in high load situations, all of the available threads might be in use. And when that happens, the server can't process the new request until the other threads are freed up. So there's kind of a waiting game. With synchronous code, many threads may be tied up while they aren't doing work because they're waiting for IO to complete. With asynchronous code, when the process is waiting for IO to complete, its thread is freed up for the server to use for processing other requests. So it enables basically the server to be used more efficiently, and the server can handle more traffic without delays. It does introduce some overhead, though. That's what it says. So for low traffic situation, the performance hit is negligible. You won't even notice it. But for high traffic situations, it can really improve the performance quite a bit, and basically not have your website crash either. So what we're excuse me, what we're going to do here is we're going to add this little bit of code. And now my question is, where the heck does this code go? Right. Doesn't really tell you where it goes. That is not very helpful, by the way. I'm going to assume that this goes in, well, it's got to go in one of the CS files. So let me just pause for a second and see if I can figure that out. Right, so I did a little bit of research here, and I'm still, real frankly, a little bit confused as how they're proceeding, because when I look at, I was just looking up, basically this, knowing that they want us. And here's the thing, they're not really wanting us to do this, they're having us take notice of this, right? So what they did basically is there's all of these going on, and it kind of happened automatically, right? And if you look at all the instances of this, right, basically they have all these spots in the application, like for example, right, where that are marked asynchronous, right, in order to enable that memory management and application boost to happen. So it's already in there, is kind of the takeaway. It's nothing that we need to do. But they just want you to be aware of what that means. And you know, the await command is kind of similar to some of the commands that we've seen in Java. Once again, you know, when we're running multi-threading, um, and you're kind of like trying to free up space for other people to do that. They do talk about, you know, this more, right? So what they're showing here is that you could actually limit how many things you're changing at once, or you're considering allowing people to change at once. And you know what, this gets into really kind of deep, you know, philosophical aspects of application programming. And if you were a professional, you would like be working this stuff all the time, and it would be kind of second nature. But the real key to this is the fact that we do need to consider the fact that if you use an app, and you know, is it unreasonable to think that you might have multiple people using it at the same time? No, absolutely not, right? So you want to code so that it doesn't crash if that happens. And that's a real common thing for websites that aren't built well, is, you know, they barely ever get any traffic and they work fine. Then all of a sudden there's a reason why they're getting a ton of traffic, and then it can't handle it at all because it is not working with any of these considerations in mind. One of the advantages of using a powerful backend engine like .NET Core is the ability that it has to do these things and allow you basically to scale an application to the size you need and still have it perform well, right? Without crashing it. All right, so we are basically finished with part one here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video here. So that's the end of this video. And then I will attempt to do some of the other ones in the next day or so, and then get those published for you too. So this video ends here. Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.